Do you have an idea for a product that will improve quilting or another craft? Something that can make the process smarter, faster, easier, or make the experience more pleasant. But how can you take that idea, test it, and bring it to reality? Today's guest, Jaqueline Sava, founder of Soak Wash, did just that. Now in its 20th year, her company's products, Soak and Flatter, can be found on shelves all around the world. And she's telling us all about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Jaqueline Sava. Hello, Jacqueline. Whereabouts in the world are you coming to us?
I am an hour north of Toronto. We're in a little township called East Garifraxa. 2 years ago, we bought a 1901 schoolhouse on an acre out in the middle of nowhere. It's not really the middle of nowhere. It's about 15 minutes from Orangeville. But yeah, I'm in a 1901 schoolhouse. I have windows on all sides. I have cows across the street and cornfields that way and a big yard. And I love it.
That sounds like a wonderful place to run a company from.
Yeah, it's where my home office is. And it's a nice break from all the traveling and the city and the office and everything like that, because I come back here and it's just really quiet and it's really chilled. And I'm pretending I know how to grow dahlias. It's great.
I think you were one of the first people I met when I went to the Toronto Modern Guild, when the workroom held it in their back studio. How did you get into quilting?
Oh, well, I mean, I grew up sewing. My mom was a clothing designer, and so we always had fabric and sewing around. She would make us dresses or outfits or dance costumes or whatever. And one of her best friends was a quilter. So I used to always kind of watch her quilt and see her quilting. As I grew up, I started, you want to make a baby quilt for a friend or actually try to work on something. And then a mutual friend of Karen from the workrooms, she was opening the workroom and we had just started Soak, and they were like, you have to meet her. She should sell your product. That's how I met her many moons ago. And then when I really got into it, I think I was using my old machine and I had learned about a walking foot and I wanted to, get that walking foot experience. And so my husband and I were talking about like a walking foot and if you could get one to go for my sewing machine, but he was secretly really doing, research to buy. He bought me my first Bernina from Karen at the workroom. And then once you get that, you're just like away at the races. So
your company Soak came before you really threw yourself into quilting.
For sure. Yeah. Soak started in, we're almost at our 20th anniversary, which is
wow.
Insane.
Congratulations.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. 2006 was our first trade show. We started in the knitting industry. I'm like a mediocre knitter. I can, I've finished one sweater in 5 years and I can't knit and do anything else at the same time. And so I was designing knitwear and people were asking how to take care of it. And we knew we didn't like the different washes that were available on the market. And we were telling people to use baby shampoo and all these other things to wash these knits because they had wool and cashmere and silk and all these different fibers, and you can't just throw that in the wash. It would get ruined, it would shrink. And also, invisible dirt. People don't wash their knits enough. They don't wash their quilts enough, their pillows on their sofa, their pillow covers. And so we created Soak as a secondary product to go with my knit accessories. And then over the years, it's just kind of grown and grown and grown. And now it is what it is.
Well, I think your booth is one of the most colorful ones at trade shows with all the colors of the Flatter lined up, and yeah. It's just a joy to walk in. You just want to be part of it somehow.
We're kind of like the shoe polish to the shoe in the sense that when we're at an event, most people are selling shoes. So it's either all fabric or it's all yarn, or we're in the lingerie industry, it's all lingerie. And then you have our booth, which is sort of like a little beautiful pop-up of colorful bottles. And we try to always have a lot of light and make it bright and friendly. And it's kind of like a little break from all of the fabric that you kind of see out there at an event.
So were you a starcher right from the beginning?
Flatter's a starch alternative. So there's no actual starch in here. There's smoothers, there's softeners. I don't know that I was a starcher in terms of wanting things to be rigid. I've always been an ironer. I was like the kid in high school who ironed shirts in the morning. I have no idea why in retrospect, but I liked ironing. Sometimes ironing's hard, And I'm one for picking rogue fabric. So I would pick like, a linen or something and be there forever pressing, just trying to get, you wash linen and then it's done, When Soak was gaining momentum and becoming a successful product, and when I was getting into quilting more, I had that same kind of epiphany that these products that were in the quilting industry for washing quilts, for caring for quilts, for ironing quilts were much like the washes were when we entered with Soak. They were dated. The fragrances were not appealing. The packaging was not appealing. Orvis paste, which is a horse wash, which is great for horses and there are better things to use for your fabric, was sort of the industry standard. And it was like a little clear bottle in a little like organza sachet bag, and that was sort of that was the benchmark. And then you look at the quilt behind you, contemporary fabrics, beautiful colors, these amazing materials, evolutions, iridescent fabrics, printed metallics, and then you've got this like remnant from like the 80s as your wash product. So we really wanted to design something that aligned with the transition of contemporary fabrics. And so flatter was the same thing. We heard a lot of negative feedback about the different products that were on the market, whether they made you sneeze, whether they left residue or buildup. And so we really wanted to create an ironing spray that had the ethos and the essence of soak, but served the function of smoothing fabric. And so if you're trying to make three-dimensional textured flowers and you want the petals to stand up, you need starch, and this is not for you. That's like a different game. But if what you're doing is trying to get the wrinkles out of your fabric, either when you're pre-washing fat quarters or yardage, or as you're piecing something, or you're just finger pressing a smaller piece, then flatter's really great for that, because it's smoothing the fibers and it's not leaving a residue and buildup. And really, the fragrances, this is Wild Mint. It's our newest one that I love. The fragrances are just for a little more fun for you. They're hypoallergenic, they're clean and bright. And the different color bottles is we just really want it to look pretty. We want you to enjoy using it.
Well, it does make a difference. Like I find when I pick up that flatter bottle, I starch anytime I'm using fabrics on bias. That's
for sure
when I use them. And that pop of fragrance and the packaging, I don't know why, but it works for me. And it just feels like it's a really nice part of the day, actually, when I get to use it.
For sure. Well, nobody's ever like jumped out of bed and said, I desperately want to do my laundry today, or I desperately need to do my ironing. Okay, like a few people, but like not a lot of people, So what we really want to do is kind of put more fun into those chores and take the pain points away. Nobody says like, let me just sit here and iron for 3 hours. Certainly not like I want to do a quilt back and I'm going to go to the long arm and I got to like press the whole thing. Nobody's like excited about that moment. They're excited for that to be done. So what we're trying to do is just take the fear out of laundry and get people into their favorite clothes and make you not afraid to use the good fabric and really just be able to take care. And we all know, like we've all, at least I have, like we've all tried to sew without ironing at some point. This fabric is flat enough. I can totally make this square and these points line up, but you can't. They don't. It's a pain, So if you have to go through that process of making sure you're getting on your iron, or and flatter works really nicely too. If you just have to spray something and you don't get out of the iron, you can spray it and finger press. If I'm working on a lot of small pieces or hand quilting somewhere, I'll just spray and finger press and kind of carry on. And it gives you that little bit of stability, that little bit of smoothing without any residue or buildup.
So your company has grown a lot. You've just mentioned 20 years. I mean, amazing mark, and you're also a mother of twins. Is there still time for quilting in your day?
Oh my goodness, I'm counting down. We have a getaway. We have a handmade getaway planned for August 26th. Counting down the days. I have 5,000 projects like stacked here, like way more than I can accomplish in a few days. Not really. I tend to quilt or sew in like larger segments if I have a day or a couple days. I have been contemplating a fall season where I just put the sewing machine at the end of the dining room table because I don't have a dedicated sewing space here. And I might leave it there for a while and just see if I can, go at it every day for a little bit. But I tend to sew in bursts. So if we're away for a few days, or I want to work on a project, and I'll just kind of make a big mess and sew for a few days and then kind of put it away. So I can go months without getting something. Or I like to take workshops. Like I was in Ottawa earlier in the summer when Jen Kingwell, my very good friend and designer from Australia, was teaching at About Patchwork. So I hopped on the train and went to Ottawa for the week. So, I mean, I got more socializing done than sewing per se, but still, it was a hand quilting class.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you do any hand quilting?
I do like a little bit. I can do like a pillow-sized hand quilting project. I do love sashiko stitching, not per se like the traditional, but I do really like hand quilting pillows and doing like a really wide stitch, multicolored sashiko quilting to kind of get the top layer sandwiched together. I love a good wide running stitch. So I do that a lot for a lot of pillows that I have. Yeah, I mean, sometimes small things, I have 2 young kids. So we do a lot of like patching things, and I taught Felix and Stella how to patch things because they keep cutting stuff. So if you're going to cut a hole in your knees, if you fall and you get a hole, I'm in. But if you cut a hole, you're patching it up. My son really loves sashiko. He calls it sashimi, even though he knows it's called sashiko. But you give him a needle and a thread and a hole, and he is just he's all over it. And so he
How
does
old are the twins now?
they're 8. They just turned 8. I know they call everything needling, whether it's like stitching, cross stitching, embroidery. I just finished a Bargello pillow from Hello Bargello. That's also on my list to like, well, I finished the top to turn it into a pillow on this getaway. They love to get in there. So whether it's like a needle and thread, whether it's yarn, I can't knit at home when they're awake because they just want to get in there and then it's just a mess and I'm not skilled enough to fix a mess. And they do like to sew at the sewing machine. So I was thinking if I have it out that we could do some sewing. Stella's made like quilts for her stuffies, and if I'm making a baby quilt, or they'll help me pick out the fabrics and, you know, if it's for someone that we all know and work on something. So, and I'm almost done there, like big kid quilts. So I was not going to be one of the people that started it and finished it at university, but I was trying to finish it before we moved into this house, and we've had the keys for 3 years. So I feel like I'm right on track. So almost done.
So do you take a project on the road with you? Because I know you do a lot of trade shows all over the world.
Yeah, I always have something with me. So the last, like, I got the Hello Bargello pillow kit at Rhinebeck at the New York Sheep and Wool Festival in October. So that traveled with me for the last like several months. And the top's done now. I just have to make it into a pillow. We'll see how long that takes. I knit a knit collage sweater. So I was working on that, the garden party sweater, before the pandemic. And I finished it for Sheep and Wool for my Rhinebeck sweater this year. So that's like 6 years or something like that. But I couldn't, if I got into trouble, I couldn't get myself out of trouble. So that could delay things like 4 months if I didn't see someone that I knew could help me get out of trouble. So yeah, I do try to always have something with me. I have another embroidery project that I'm working on. I sometimes am working on a cross stitch, or I've got like a lot of like pillow tops. I've realized like the lifespan for a pillow in my life is 7 or 8 years, because I made a lot of pillows in the year before the twins were born. A lot of challenges, a lot of doctor's offices, a lot of waiting time. And those pillows are really wearing out now. So they are like, the fabric is just, we use things hard in this house. So they're just really worn out. So I'm trying to do a resurgence of a new round of sofa pillows. So, and I've been known to like carry a whole queen size quilt to like a room or on a trip to just like work on the binding. I love binding. So I have been known to show up with like an armful and then just like, you know, work on my binding. So
you've brought 2 really good products to market. If somebody had a good idea, what would you say their first steps before investing thousands and thousands of dollars in getting a product up and live? What's the first steps that people should take?
So for me, the first steps are about research and seeing what's actually out there in the market. And we went through that whole process. We've recently acquired So Fine thread gloss. I don't know if I can, like, which way is the camera? Ooh, there it is. And so we did a lot of research. So understanding the market, understanding what the product you want to create is about, understanding who the competitors are, both locally and further away, who else is doing what you're doing, and then getting a really good understanding of what the pricing is really important as well. So how much is it selling for? Why is that the price? And then how are you going to make it? And then I think also understanding who the customer is. So it's really about getting a good understanding of where you're going with it and what the market is before you start investing in making something. And sometimes we do have to like make a small batch of something and put it out there and see if people like it. That can be part of the research process, but we don't want to invest too heavily until we do that research, because we don't want to end up with something that's not quite right that we have to re-engineer, right?
So you started with soak. Were you just experimenting in your kitchen? Do you know a chemist? How did you
Yeah, it's a great,
figure those out?
It's great. Especially with little kids, I'm very fascinated with like core memories and like those single events that you can just recall like exactly what the space was like. And so I can remember exactly where and how soap came to be. So my background's product design, industrial design, product development. And I had a colleague who worked in sales at one of the companies I was doing design work for, and she left and went to a liquid cosmetics company. So she was working on like bubble baths and skin creams and sugar scrubs and that kind of thing. And she was doing private label, which means she works for like a big manufacturer where they do custom packaging for other people. So they didn't have their own brands, they worked on other brands and they did the manufacturing. And we were out for lunch one day at Swan in Toronto. She would always show up with samples, like lab samples, or she would have some skin creams where they went down the production line. If you ever notice on your toothpaste where it's like folded together and sealed at the top, there's like a little black mark, that's a registration mark to get it lined up exactly perfectly in production. And so she would show up with like samples of hand creams where that was like shifted. And so the label wasn't straight, that wasn't sellable. And she, she'd have them in her drawer, just like I have like a desk full of mini soaks and stuff like that. So she would bring me those kind of samples. And so we were having lunch and we were talking about bubble bath. And she was like, oh, do you like this packaging? Do you like this? And I said to her, like, hey, I wonder if we could make a wool wash, because I was designing knitwear under Jack's hats. And we were selling it, and we were just starting to get wholesale accounts from doing like one of a kind and craft shows and like doing it ourselves. We had just got an agent to distribute, a sales agent who was going to sell it into stores, our knits. And I was having this dialogue with people about how to take care of them. And I wasn't really able to finish the sentence. I was like, you have to hand wash it. You need to use a gentle soap. You can't put it in the washing machine because there was wool and we don't want it to shrink. And then I wasn't able to say like, and you should use this, right? I couldn't finish that sentence. So I thought, well, if I can make a wool wash, and I didn't like the products on the market for a variety of reasons. And I love competition. I love all businesses. I just didn't find something that I wanted to put next to our knits. And so I said, hey, I wonder if we can develop a wool wash together. Could we do this? Like, could you make it for me? And so then I started the research, right? Like, what did I want it to look like? What did I want it to feel like? I always like to find a product that has the essence of what I'm trying to make, which is something I learned in design school many years ago. You might not be able to articulate your vision, but is there something else completely unrelated on the market that has the kind of vibe that you're looking for? This soap I got that's like, totally soak worthy, but has nothing to do with soap, right? So it's like finding something that has the essence of what you're trying to do can often help you get through that design process. And so we worked with their lab. And because I had a background in product design, we started doing bottles and sourcing and labels and fragrances and all those things. And it was a real steep learning curve. But together we developed soak. We did the smallest production run we could. The pallet racking in our warehouse, pallet racking is like the big industrial metal shelves. The industrial metal shelves from our first production of shelves are still in our warehouse now, but now we use them for cardboard boxes. So we have as many different kinds of boxes as we used to have all of our inventory of soap. Yeah, so we just had this and was like, hey, I wonder if you could make a wool wash that comes from a skincare background. So it's gentle, it's fresh, it's clean, fragrances, packaging, different scents, different colors to kind of go with our knitwear. And that's kind of where it started.
And you've worked really hard to get global distribution on this product, haven't you?
I'm having a really weird summer. Like, it's really weird to, I was just off for a couple of weeks with the kids, which was amazing. I leaned in really hard to just not working. Yeah, like a lot of things have happened recently that we've worked really hard on for a lot of years. And so I'm kind of in awe right now. Like, I feel like I'm a little bit outside myself looking in, because sometimes I see soak and I feel like, is that even real? Is it just like pretend, or is it, make believe or fake or whatever, not in a I'm fake kind of way, but just like I'm so into it, right? That you're so attached to something that you can't sort of step away and see it. But this summer we launched at Harrods in the UK, and I got to go there and do training and product knowledge and like walk through Harrods and then like spot the product I made on the shelf. And that was pretty wild. I'm not going to lie. That was pretty fun.
Well, that must have been pretty exciting.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. It felt pretty real. It felt pretty legit. Yeah. And we have 10 of us on our team now, and a warehouse full, and we are shipping in lots of different countries, and we still have lots of challenges and growing pains. And someone once, many years ago, an advisor, because I was like, when is it going to stop being so hard? It's always a good question, right? When is it going to not be so painful? And his, wise words were, it doesn't get less painful. The problems are just different, and you learn how to manage them.
Having been in business myself, every time I ever thought, oh, I can coast for a little bit now, that's when all the shit hit the fan.
Oh yeah, there's no coasting.
There's no coasting.
I mean, I have a great team, so I wouldn't say it's not coasting. It's like I have much better support now. So I have, we had 3 really big events this summer, and I only went to one of them. So that's amazing, because I have great people to rely on and that I work with, and we all have a good trusting team. It's hard work. I mean, every now and then I used to, when I lived in the city and our offices in Mississauga, if I really was having a hard time, I would give myself like the distance of the commute. So either to work or home from the office, to try to think of something that I would rather do the next day. And if I couldn't come up with something that I would rather do, then I would be like, okay, then cool, then you're going to work tomorrow. Once or twice over the years, I would like get off the highway at Lakeshore and go to the rowing club and just like row on the lake for 2 hours and then bury my head in the sand and then deal with it later, but most of the time, like I couldn't come up with something I'd rather be doing. And so I was like, okay, then guess, carry on.
What challenges did you have turning from a small company, like you personally have, when you shift it from being a small company to a bigger company? Like you've got 10 employees now.
How much time do you have? We're still categorized as like in official terms as like a micro organization, right? Like we're,
Okay.
big for us is still little for like most people. But I think processes and systems is the hardest thing, because you go through these shifts where like, you have 3 or 4 people and everybody just knows everything and what to do. And then when you get like 5 or 6 people or 7 or 8 people, you have to start writing stuff down so that people can follow it. And so these transitions from, oh, I just know what to do, to, no, you have to do it the same way so that we can keep track of it, or if something goes wrong, those shifts are really hard. And making sure that people are open to that and that they come along with on that journey is really challenging. Or, we used to walk in the warehouse and be like, oh yeah, we should probably order some. And now we're like 6 months ahead in our inventory. And so we have a lot of inventory because a lot of things happen and sometimes we get slammed and we need product. So, now we order bottles 100,000 at a time. So that's like a different beast than what's the very minimum I can order, because it'll last me a while. And I think they're the problems that everyone encounters. We're not special or unique. Everyone goes through growing pains.
Well, I remember having to write an employee handbook because you moved from, as you say, 2 or 3 people and everybody knew what to do, to these strangers coming in and suddenly realizing, okay, they can take washroom breaks and they can stand around the water dispenser, but you can't do both.
Right. Yeah.
Like I understand you need to take breaks from your work, but you can only take these types of, like you can only choose one, or just having a maternity leave policy, and it has to align with government guidelines. But what happens when somebody dies in their family? If it's an uncle or it's a stepbrother or something like that, like everybody kind of knows it, but you have to put it, suddenly you have to have it in paper.
Our internal office philosophy is family first, and there are no detergent emergencies. So when somebody comes to me with a situation, I'm like, family first, and there are no detergent emergencies. So what's our solution? People come from all over the world. We have, Priya on our team who does finance, who I love. When she started, someone in her family was not doing well overseas, and she had just started, and she had this like look on her face. And I was like, so I want to have a long-term relationship with you. I think we're going to work really well together. Is it going to go, better or worse if I tell you can't go right now? Or I say, like, go home, sort it out. And if you get on a plane tonight, send me a text, right? Like, there are no detergent emergencies, and family is more important than detergent. So, and then work, really. We do have a lot of those policies, and you do need them. And so, you need processes, and you need to align with, payroll and government things and international things and agents and all that kind of stuff. So for sure, all that stuff, regulatory. Oh my gosh, I make a product with like 27, they can be, or, they can be naturally derived ingredients, but they're still chemicals. I mean, we're made up of chemicals. So like shipping that around the world is super fun. All those things matter, but we really try to be people focused and make sure that we can accommodate people. And then of course, the last few years of working from home and remote and all that stuff is like thrown another whole tailspin into all those kind of things. But yeah, I mean, you have to be able to integrate people in, and you have to be able to explain why you need systems and processes and what the outcome is if we don't have them.
Have you been able to get any kind of outside support, whether through government programs or just mentorship programs, just to help you on your way?
Yeah, for sure. We've had a lot, actually. We've done a lot of projects with the Industrial Research Assistance Program when we've been doing product development, some grants. We won a federal development women's grant of $100,000. And that was, I want to say 2018, like pre-pandemic. We wrote a really good grant about wanting support when the federal government was doing initiatives for supporting women in business. We used that for intellectual property, IP, and technology development. That was pretty wild. I found out about that grant like a week before it was due, and I was like, well, there's no way I can write a proposal. I had some friends who were doing it, and then the morning of the deadline, I woke up at 7 and I looked at Ted, my husband, and I was like, I'm going to the office. I'm writing this grant proposal. It's due at midnight. I'm not coming out until it's done, because if I don't get this, if I didn't at least try and all these other people did it and get it, I'm going to be really angry for a really long time. So see you later. And I got to the office and I went in my office and I shut the door and I said, unless the building's burning down, nobody opens this door. feel free to like slide food underneath, but like nobody opens this door. And I feel like I finished it at like 10 or 11 at night. And we were successful. We got $100,000. So yeah, there's lots of great programs. We got a lot of, we leaned hard into a lot of the support during the pandemic as well. We worked tirelessly to keep everybody employed and keep everybody at their full salaries. And we divided up those resources to the people who needed it. You know, we had real frank conversations about whether you were, you know, it wasn't so much about whether you were like a single income or a double income family. It was just like, are you okay right now? What do you need to be okay right now? Because, you know, I'm really about equity, not equality. And so it was like, what does everybody need to be okay right now? Is it working from home? Is it part-time? Is it, you know, we had people who worked part-time and stayed on their full-time salaries. It was like, what do you need, right? Like, it's not going to serve you better if you have to like quit and then reapply to part-time and then go stand in line to try to get other subsidies because you need to live, you know, like those employer subsidies during the pandemic were designed so that I could take on that work and everybody else could just like deal with life, you know? So we've definitely had a lot of support through those kind of programs. We've worked with the Business Development Bank of Canada when we moved for like you know, moving support loans and marketing loans. We've really used a lot of the resources out there. We do try to look for support when we can. And then we also try to work hard to support other people who need help. You know, our loading dock is like the go-to for the Toronto craft community when people do their first trade shows. You know, when people are like, what's a pallet? How do I wrap something? What's customs? How do I get it there? What do I do? I'm like, just bring it over here. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the early side effects was the cost of corrugate skyrocketing. And so we got sort of a heads up from one of our suppliers. And I got on the phone that day. I called like 12 people. I was like, you need to go today. And like, if you have the cash flow, you need to buy a year's worth of cardboard boxes. I know it sounds crazy, but next week they're going to cost 4 times more. And that's a really weird thing to do, right? Like, who cares about that, right? You know, but it happened, right? You know, vaccines were packed in cardboard boxes and the price of paper skyrocketed. And between that and everybody like working from home and ordering off Amazon, the price of cardboard went up astronomically. So, you know, if you get information and you can help other people, then we really try to do that as well.
How much is sustainability part of your packaging and processes?
Sustainability has been kind of a core of our business from before, like sustainability was in fashion, so to speak. So we get asked a lot why we don't talk more about the sustainable aspects of our brand. And it's because it was sort of like built into our ethos. Like, we've been using recycled, like 100% post-consumer resin since I want to say 2012. And it was really expensive then. It was more expensive to buy recycled plastic than new plastic. And we kind of did it anyways. We do make liquid in a plastic bottle. We get asked that a lot. Like, why are you using plastic? Plastic's bad. And the answer to that is because people really don't want to pay to ship glass around. And our product is mostly sold wholesale. So it does have a certain shelf appeal and it needs to be on display in a way that people can see what it is. So we get that question a lot. And so within those frameworks, we're trying to do the best that we can. We recycle all of our cardboard. We reuse our boxes endlessly in manufacturing. Our paper packaging is forest certified paper or recycled paper when we can. Our ingredients are also naturally derived and hypoallergenic. So we are trying to kind of balance the realities of commercialization. I mean, I think going back to your previous question about developing a new product, like for me, you have like a product, you have a pricing structure, and you have a customer. So those 3 things have to align. And so if people aren't buying or you can't sell, you have to figure out which one of those things is out of alignment. So if there isn't a customer for what you're trying to make, then you have to shift what you're doing to match a customer. And if you have a product and a customer, but they're not buying it, is it because the pricing is out of alignment? Why aren't you using all organic ingredients? And why are you using this and that? Well, I can, and we have costed out those things. But the question is, are you going to pay $40 for a bottle of flatter, right? If your structure prices you out of the market, then that's not helpful either. And for sure, you know, if you think about cosmetics, there are high-end cosmetics. There are people that pay $250 for skin cream. Most of us don't, but it's a smaller market, right? So if you can find that market and that niche who's willing to pay for that, then that's great as well. So we're always kind of trying to balance the best that we can do in terms of product development, efficacy, sustainability, ingredients, packaging, with the realities of commerce, which is that people have budgets, you know, and people get to choose what they spend their money on. So making sure that the product is still sellable in the marketplace.
So on top of everything, you are actually an author with Karen Velino of a wonderful book, one of my favorite ever quilting books. And that was a multi-year effort, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it started not as a book and it sort of evolved into a book. I feel like Ted and I went to the cottage for like a week. He was into radio control cars at the time, and I brought my sewing machine and I set up a folding table outside and was like, I'm going to sew outside. And then I was immediately like, oh, I gotta bring people here to do this business. This is amazing. And so the next year I invited Karen and a handful of other friends from the workroom, people I didn't actually know very well. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to get to know people better. I thought, what a better way to get to know people than to spend some time doing what we love. And that really evolved into us going away twice a year, once in the summer, once in the winter, for a week, or as close to a week as we could get, to really lean into our sewing. And so over the years, we got better at, we joke that first getaway, as we call them now, we said, well, everyone makes one breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it'll all map out, except for it was corn season, and we all brought corn. And you cannot eat corn for 7 days in a row, nor can you actually store corn for like 5 days in the hot summer at a cottage, right? It was a corn disaster. So then we started doing things like making a food chart, and also that year we all brought all of our rulers. And so you had like 50 rulers, right? And we're like, well, that's silly, right? So we started kind of refining our own processes for ourselves just to make it more efficient and easier for traveling. And so we would start to be like, okay, who's making clothing? You got to bring who's bringing the serger. Years later, on the last day, we were really good at like the last meal is like a leftovers meal, and we were like, oh, we did really well. Like, we don't have a lot of leftovers. We don't have extra stuff. And then we sort of joked that we, had all these skills together that we should put them in a book and we should write a book. And Karen and I looked at each other and we were like, yep, that's a great idea. And Karen's a photographer by trade, and she always has her camera with her. So she had been photographing since the first getaway. So there is a photograph of the, 73 rulers laid out on the deck, so we sort of had this documentation already, and we were able to, reach into that and bring it forward and look at the kind of projects that we created. So really that, going back to research, right? It was really looking back before going forward. What information do we have? What do we know? And when we pulled all the pieces apart and kind of re-put them back together, that's where we ended up with like fabric, food, and friends, because everything kind of fit into one of those three categories. It was either about the act of sewing and the fabric, or it was about food, or it was about friends and the people and community. And so that's kind of how the themes of the book evolved.
How long did it actually take to write?
I would say the book was like 3 years, but there's so many elements, right? Karen did the photography and the instructions for all the patterns, the step-by-step photography. So the writing is really only one component of the book. The photography is super critical to how beautiful that book is. And Andrew, who did the design of the book as well, in terms of laying out the patterns in a way that you can follow them and read them, and also laying out the copy and the art of the book. They kind of happened over time. And we went through a few phases with some different publishers on that book when we were pitching it. And there's a thing in publishing about like, again, the research, who's going to buy the book? How much is it going to sell for? Where is it going to go? What's its plan in life? And so there was a phase where we were really leaning into what the publishers wanted. Like a publisher once told us, well, if you have 6 friends and you're planning a getaway, then only one person needs the book because they're the planner. So your audience is only 1/6 of sewists. And we were like, well, that's confusing. Really, it's a beautiful coffee table book, and it's a love story to our friends, and it's a love story to Canada and sewing. In addition to being how to plan a getaway and having a lot of good instructions, it serves a lot of purposes, that book. We sort of got on this tangent where all of a sudden we looked at the table of contents and we were like, I don't even understand what I was trying to do anymore. Like we were trying to tailor it so hard to what publishers wanted. And then when we leaned away from that into like, what are we really trying to say and what do we want to say? And then the book came back to life. Really, when we distilled all the parts of research we had, that we realized there was a flow. There is a difference between having a sewing afternoon and having a sewing week. You can't accomplish the same kind of things, like on my head, I'm completely preoccupied with what I'm going to do. And I'm only going to be, I think we're going for 5 days. I can only go for 3, and I have like 1,000 projects, right? So we really pulled back into like what we were really trying to say. And so the book is really broken out to whether you have an afternoon, a day, a weekend, a long weekend, or a week, like different kinds of projects, different kinds of foods and snacks. If you're only meeting for an evening, your snacks are made ahead of time. They're pre-cut. They don't make a lot of mess. They don't require a lot of extra utensils, and they can just be like put on a table and people can snack. When we're there all week, we each take turns cooking, and sometimes you might stop at 3 o'clock because you're going to make a beautiful dinner for everybody else. But it's because another day you can wake up at 7 and you can sew till midnight and nobody's going to ask you to do anything. you know? So this really different kind of environment. And once we really leaned back into what we were trying to say, then the book really came together.
It was beautiful. You did it as a Kickstarter campaign, but there seemed to be an awful lot of work that you had to do after the success of your Kickstarter. Like you moved to a different platform, you had
Yeah.
to mail everything out.
Yeah.
You had to do a lot of planning on your own.
We were working with a publisher, and then we had creative differences and we decided to publish it ourselves. Again, you know, it's sort of like being in business, whether you're selling direct to consumer, you're selling wholesale, you sell through distributors, like each one of those things is another job. And so your pricing and your structure has to do with how many of those jobs you're going to do, you know? You don't make more money necessarily selling direct to consumers than you do when you're selling to stores or wholesales. You're just doing like less or more jobs, in my opinion. I sometimes work on projects that called unicorn projects, like really hard to replicate, and maybe you couldn't really like do it if you tried. You know, Karen's brother's a videographer. He did the video story. We have a really wide network of friends that we could lean into for projects. You know, Margaret had just set up in Dripping Springs at Maker's Luck, which doesn't exist anymore. So we were able to use that as our grand getaway prize, you know, building out an adventure with her. You know, we pulled in Lizzie House to bring back some Meadows classes that she hadn't done. There was really a lot of great things we could do in addition to just the book. And because I have Soak, we had a distribution outlet for doing the fulfillment. You know, it's a totally different thing to write a book and then figure out how to ship it. We ship stuff every day. Like a multi-purpose kind of girl. I said to our operations team at the time, you're going to get a cycle of 2,000 books that are going to come through this warehouse. And I want nobody to need to use a pen and paper. I was like, we are using this opportunity to level up our shipping processes and go digital and go automated, because we will kill ourselves if we have to like hand stick and hand label and write a thing and write notes on this process. It needs to come in and out fast. And that's what we did. We leveled up our shipping, you know, ShipStation or ClickShip or whatever it was at the time, you know, and we used BackerKit, which is like a company that created itself for a back end for Kickstarter, knowing that people have this problems. And then when the orders came in, we like downloaded them, we uploaded an app, like all the shipping labels printed in batches, and like nobody used a pen and paper, you know, and then now we use that technology at our office since, you know. So it would have been really different if you were an author and you're doing it out of your living room. But like I had a warehouse, so the pallets of books came to the loading dock, right? Yeah. We had shelves to put them on, right? We could order the corrugate from our box supplier. It's, you know, we had a lot of things going for us when we made those decisions to do it ourselves. I don't know that I would have done it if I didn't have those things in place, you know? And it's similar to the acquisition of So Fine Thread Gloss, right? Like, you know, I'm really close with Jen, who's founded this company. She's staying on, you know, helping us through this transition. She made each one of these herself. I'm not making each one of these myself. She's approved the lab samples. They are to the same standard. They are the same quality of awesomeness. But we have one of our manufacturers that used to produce candles that can make wax things. So we worked with them before the acquisition to be like, can you make this? Can we afford to make this? How many do we have to make? Like Soak's beginning. What's the minimum we can make of each one? Because our production's obviously like way higher than if you're making it just like by hand, right? It's like, what's the minimum? What's the minimum commitment I can make for this? To try to get it off the ground and to launch it, you know?
For people that don't know what thread gloss is, what do you use thread gloss for?
Yeah, so Fine Thread Gloss it's a beeswax base cloth with fragrances as well. This is Satsuma. Like if I take my thread and I pull it apart, and let's say I have scissors and I'm not just ripping it with my hand, right? It's kind of bumpy. And, you know, when I twist it and when I sew, especially if we're doing binding, we often get like those twists and tangles and stuff. So assuming I've put this, let's say I put this on my needle already, and then I put my thumb on it, I'll do it this way. And then I just pull it through a couple times. And then what happens is, as you can see, the thread's just it's way straighter, right? And it just goes through the fabric more easily, and it doesn't tangle and it doesn't twist. It's like a gloss, it lets it glide through. Similar to flatter, right? It's like a smoothing agent. It helps when you're sewing, you don't get twists and tangles and knots. And so it makes hand sewing way easier, the same way that flatter makes ironing easier and Soak makes doing your laundry easier. So we really a lot of alignment in products and strategy.
Would you use that on both polyester and cotton?
Yep. I use it on hand quilting. I will use it on sashiko thread. I won't use it on like a metallic because you don't want it to like take the sheen away. You wouldn't use it if you were using like a boucle or like a really floofy yarn and you wanted the fluff to still be there, you know? But I do use it on hand sewing. I use it on embroidery yarn. I've been using it on cross stitching. I'm not using it on my wool Bargello because I want that like loft and that fluff, but also the thicker yarns and the thicker needles. You're not using as long of a thread and it's not kind of twisting. The product's been on the market for several years. People do love it. It's got a nice little following.
So if people want to find more about soak or flatter or the thread gloss, how did they get a hold of you?
We are soakwash.com or soakwash.ca, sofine.ca. And of course, we're on social media. So Sofine at Sofine Thread Gloss or at Soakwash. Our website's got a really great feature, which is called Soak School, where you can really learn all the different things to do with soak, like many different uses, many different functions for soak.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. You've shared
pleasure.
all sorts of wonderful information.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Jaqueline Sava. Her 20-year anniversary shows just how great her products continue to be. I will leave a link to the Soak website in the video notes below. I will also leave a link to their social media accounts. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing and interesting people on this series. Let one inspire you. And don't forget to download the YouTube Music app, where you can listen to episodes as a podcast and take them with you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.